The tragedy of Dion Anthony Fay's life, when he was the son of Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck was the highest-paid woman in America. 4 Oscar nominations, 80 films, 3 Emmy Awards. Every major Hollywood publication called her the greatest actress of her generation. And here is what she did to her only child. She adopted him not because she wanted a son, but because her marriage was collapsing and she needed a better headline. She was not present when he lay in a hospital bed at 12 years old after a camp accident. She sent him to military school at 15 and never shared a home with him again. She cut off all contact when he became an adult. She left him $5,000 in her will, on the condition that he never speak about her publicly. And when she was dying, she signed a written order. Her son was not permitted to enter her room. Dion Anthony Fay died in 2006 at the age of 74. There was no obituary in any major newspaper, no mention in Hollywood trade press, no tribute, no memorial. He died the way his mother intended, as if he had never existed. Today we are not talking about her films. We are talking about the decisions she made, one by one, across 5 decades. Because when you look at those decisions closely, you realize they were not random. They follow a logic. And that logic begins on a street corner in Brooklyn in 1911, before Barbara Stanwyck ever existed. Ruby Stevens and the lesson that never left. Her name was Ruby Stevens. She was born on July 16, 1907, the youngest of 5 children in a working-class Brooklyn family. By the time she was 4 years old, her childhood was effectively over. On a winter afternoon in 1911, her mother Catherine was riding a streetcar through Brooklyn when a drunk passenger lurched forward and shoved her off the moving trolley. Catherine was 8 months pregnant. She hit the pavement and never stood up again. Ruby and her older brother Byron were on that streetcar. They watched it happen. 2 weeks after the funeral, their father, Byron Sr., surrendered. Unable to cope with 5 children and a grief he had no tools to carry, he left for work on the Panama Canal and never returned. In the space of a single month, Ruby Stevens had lost both parents, one to violence, one to abandonment. She was 4 years old. The 5 children were dispersed into the foster system. Ruby and Byron were separated because most households could only take one child at a time. The girl who had just watched her mother die on a public street was now alone. She moved through 4 different foster homes in a single year. She began smoking at 9. She dropped out of school at 13. By 15, she was fighting in the streets of Brooklyn and running from the grimmer placements. Years later, when journalists asked about her childhood, she refused to perform grief. "Let's just say I had a terrible childhood," she said. "Let's say that poor is something I understand." She had learned, very young, that sentiment was a luxury she could not afford. Survival required a different set of skills: self-sufficiency, emotional distance, and an absolute refusal to depend on anyone who might disappear. In 1927, a theater producer named Willard Mack found her in a chorus line and saw something in her that the audiences would soon discover. He combined a character name from a Broadway play with a co-star's surname and handed her a new identity: Barbara Stanwyck. The name sounded like a statement: hard consonants, no softness, no room for uncertainty. Ruby Stevens was dead at 19. Barbara Stanwyck stepped forward from the wreckage. It was not the last time she would erase a person when they stopped being useful. The boy who was purchased, not wanted. By 1932, Barbara Stanwyck was climbing. Her marriage to comedian Frank Fay was not. Fay's Broadway stardom had failed to translate to film. As Barbara's career accelerated, Frank's collapsed. He responded the way he responded to most frustrations, with alcohol and, according to multiple accounts from people who knew the household, with his hands. Hollywood studios in the 1930s had a particular mechanism for managing the public image of troubled marriages. They did not fix the marriages. They produced photographs. Magazines like Photoplay and Modern Screen ran what were effectively studio press releases dressed as journalism. The formula was reliable. A couple on the verge of disaster, photographed in their home, smiling over a shared meal or holding a child. In December 1932, Barbara and Frank visited an adoption agency. A 10-month-old boy named John Charles Green was placed in their arms. They renamed him Anthony Dion Fay. Within days, the cameras arrived. Barbara held the baby. She smiled. The photographs ran in 3 national magazines. The couple appeared happy and complete. When the cameras left, the infant was handed to a nurse. There is a particular cruelty in using a child as a prop in a performance the child cannot understand or consent to. Dion Anthony Fay was brought into that household not as a son, but as a solution to a public relations problem that had nothing to do with him. He did not know this, of course. He could not. He was 10 months old. 3 years later, the performance ended. During one of Frank Fay's drunken rages, he picked up the toddler Dion and threw him into the backyard swimming pool. Barbara pulled the child out herself. Shortly after, she filed for divorce. She won sole custody. In the courtrooms and in the press, this was presented as a triumph, the protective mother fierce and determined. But custody is a legal designation, not an emotional commitment. Winning the right to raise a child and actually raising him are entirely separate things. And Barbara Stanwyck, who had built her survival on self-reliance and the elimination of anything that slowed her down, was about to demonstrate that distinction in the most damaging way possible. The Hospital Room, 1944. In 1937, Barbara Stanwyck delivered what many critics still consider one of the greatest performances in the history of American cinema. In Stella Dallas, she played a working-class woman who sacrifices everything for her daughter, including her own presence in her daughter's life. In the film's most devastating scene, Stella stands outside an iron gate in the rain, watching her daughter's wedding through the bars because she loves the girl too much to humiliate her by walking in. The entire country wept. The Academy nominated her for Best Actress. Fan mail arrived by the thousands. That same year, Dion was 5 years old and living largely in the care of paid household staff. By 1940, he was 8. By 1944, he was 12. In the summer of 1944, Anthony Dion Fay was injured at a summer camp. The injury was serious enough to require hospitalization. The camp directors contacted Barbara Stanwyck's household. Her secretary answered. The secretary called back. Barbara Stanwyck did not come. The person who sat beside Dion's hospital bed was his uncle, a man called Buck Mack, Barbara's brother-in-law. Not his mother, his uncle. That same year, 1944, Barbara Stanwyck was the highest-paid woman in the United States, earning $323,333 annually, equivalent today to approximately $6 million. She was not available for the hospital visit. If you go back now and watch Stella Dallas knowing this, knowing what was happening in that house while the cameras were rolling, the film becomes something different. Stanwyck's Stella is so convincing, so raw, so specifically maternal in her pain, that it is almost impossible to believe the woman performing it was simultaneously demonstrating the opposite of everything her character stood for. That is, in fact, the correct reading. The performance was extraordinary precisely because it was entirely fictional. She was not drawing from personal experience. She was constructing something she had never chosen to be, and in 1947, she made her final decision about her son. Anthony was 15, a difficult student, frequently in conflict with the household's expectations. Barbara and her second husband, Robert Taylor, the two of them seated across from the boy, told him that arrangements had been made. He would be attending a military school in Indiana. That was the last time Dion Anthony Fay lived under his mother's roof. The Lavender Secret and the Price of Silence. There is something that Hollywood's official version of Barbara Stanwyck's life consistently omits. Something that helps explain, though it does not excuse, the rigid walls she maintained around herself. Robert Taylor, Barbara's second husband, married in 1939, was one of the most visually striking leading men of post-war Hollywood. He was also, according to multiple biographers and contemporaries, privately homosexual. The marriage between Stanwyck and Taylor has been extensively described by historians as a Lavender arrangement, a union between two people whose private realities differed significantly from their public personas, organized and encouraged by MGM to protect both their careers. Hollywood studios in that era had a specific contractual mechanism for this purpose. The morality clause, a standard provision in most major studio contracts, gave the studio the right to terminate an actor's contract immediately if any behavior deemed scandalous became public. Sexual orientation qualified. The studios did not need to say this explicitly. Everyone understood. On their wedding night, Robert Taylor did not stay with his new wife. He went to his mother's house to sleep. Barbara Stanwyck spent nearly 40 years inside a version of her life that was not fully her own. Her most consistent and enduring relationship appears to have been with her publicist, Helen Ferguson, who lived with her for decades and managed virtually every aspect of her public image. When a journalist once pressed her directly about rumors regarding her private life, Barbara's response was 3 words: "Next question. Out." This is not offered as an excuse for what was done to Dion, but it is context. A woman who spent her entire adult life managing the gap between who she was required to appear to be and who she actually was. That woman had particular reasons to control every narrative around her, including the narrative about her family, including the existence of a son who complicated the image she had spent 40 years constructing. Dion was not dangerous to her. He was inconvenient. And she had been eliminating inconveniences since she was 4 years old. The slow erasure. In 1952, a mutual relative arranged a lunch between Barbara Stanwyck and her son. Anthony was 20 years old. He dressed carefully for the occasion. He had prepared things to say. The meal was quiet, formal, polite in the way that two strangers are polite to each other at a business dinner. Anthony described it himself years later. As politely as a stranger, I asked about her career. As politely and distantly as a movie queen, she answered and inquired how I had been. He knew immediately that nothing had changed. Nothing was going to change. That lunch was the last time Dion Anthony Fay looked at his mother's face. Sometime after, he called his uncle to ask whether he might be able to visit. His uncle, the same man who had sat beside his hospital bed 8 years earlier, told him directly. He said to forget that Barbara Stanwyck was my mother. He said, "She wants nothing to do with you." Barbara Stanwyck's own explanation, offered in an interview some years later. Some children are born with bad blood, like horses. When a parent has done everything possible, the only solution is to save yourself. Save yourself. Her father had said something functionally identical when he left for the Panama Canal in 1911. The orphan-making system that had processed Ruby Stevens had operated on exactly the same logic. Everyone ultimately saves themselves, and the children are collateral. And now, Barbara Stanwyck, the woman who had survived all of that and built an empire from the ruins, was recycling the exact same sentence. Not as a failure of understanding. She was not a woman who lacked self-awareness. She was a woman who chose the only response to difficulty she had ever been taught. During these same years, The Big Valley was broadcasting across the United States. In it, Barbara Stanwyck played Victoria Barkley, the iron-willed matriarch of a California ranching dynasty, deeply loyal to her children, fierce in her protection of the people in her care. The show ran for 4 seasons. The audience loved her. She won 3 Emmy Awards. Anthony Dion Fay, during this same period, was arrested twice, once in 1957, once in 1960, on charges related to selling obscene material. He was working irregular jobs. He was living on the margins. On both occasions, when press photographers connected him to his famous mother, his answer was the same 2 words: "We don't speak." $5,000. Barbara Stanwyck died on January 20th, 1990, at the age of 82. She had requested no funeral, no memorial service. She wanted her ashes scattered by helicopter over a mountain location in California where she had filmed several of her westerns. She got what she asked for. She always had. When her will was read, it included donations to the Motion Picture and Television Fund, gifts to staff members who had worked for her, distributions to nieces and nephews. For Anthony Dion Fay, her only child, the one person in the world who had a legal, biological, and moral claim to call her family, the will contained a single entry: $5,000, conditional on his continued public silence about her. $5,000. In a will that distributed millions. $5,000 to purchase one final time the silence of a person she had spent 50 years making invisible. And before she signed that will, she had done one more thing. She had given written instructions to the people around her that if Dion attempted to visit her in her final days, he was not to be admitted. The door that had been quietly closing since 1947 was now officially, permanently shut. Not by death, by a document. She made sure of it. Anthony Dion Fay was not present at any memorial. There was none. He received his $5,000. He maintained his silence. He had, after all, been maintaining it for decades. He was practiced at it. What she left behind. Dion Anthony Fay died on May 17, 2006, in Van Nuys, Los Angeles County. He was 74 years old. No major entertainment outlet published an obituary. His name does not appear in the standard Hollywood biographical databases. There are no tributes on record. He was survived by at least one child, a grandchild Barbara Stanwyck never met from a wedding she did not attend. The son of the highest-paid woman in America spent his final decades in anonymity, managing motels, living quietly in the San Fernando Valley, 20 miles from the studios that had made his mother immortal. The film critic Richard Corliss once wrote a single sentence about this relationship that no scriptwriter could improve on. The child resembled her in exactly one respect. Both of them were, effectively, orphans. It is the right word. Stanwyck was orphaned at 4 by forces beyond her control. A drunk stranger, a father who broke. Dion was orphaned at 15 by a deliberate choice, made by someone with every option available and every resource to do otherwise. There is a version of this story where Barbara Stanwyck's history earns her some clemency. She was formed by abandonment. She was constrained by a system that made authenticity professionally fatal. She operated inside a machinery that consumed people and called it entertainment. All of that is true, but none of it rewrites what happened when she sat across from a 20-year-old boy at a lunch arranged by a relative, looked at him with the same emotional distance she gave to strangers, and made the decision, conscious, deliberate, repeated, to choose the empire over the person. Ruby Stevens was 4 years old when someone decided she was not worth staying for. She learned from that. She passed it on. The films remain. The image remains. The Emmy Awards, the honorary Oscar, the magazine covers, and the critical tributes, they remain. And they are not wrong. She was extraordinary at what she did. But in the one role no acting class can prepare you for, no director can rewrite, and no studio can reframe, she played the scene exactly as she had seen it played, in Brooklyn, in the rain, when she was 4 years old. She left, and she did not come back.